It was almost 11 when the knock came. The rain had been coming down for hours, hard enough that I heard it before I heard her. I opened the door, and there she was on my step, soaked through, a suitcase by her feet, one hand white-knuckled around the handle of an old leather bag. Her hair was plastered to her face, her pale blue dress gone dark at the shoulders. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then she looked up at me and said, "Can I stay? I have nowhere else to go." I didn't move. I just stood there with my hand on the door, the porch light buzzing over us, the wet street shining behind her in the dark. "My name is Sam. I am 34 years old, and for most of my life I have made my living putting broken things back together. I restore old furniture in a small shop in Richmond, Virginia, in a brick building on a street that has slowly turned fashionable around me. People bring me the pieces they cannot bring themselves to throw away, chairs they are certain are finished, tables with a leg that has given out, dressers left in a garage to warp. I take my time, and I give them back something that looks like it remembers being loved. I live alone. I have since the divorce, which was 2 years ago now, in a small house a few blocks from the shop, the kind of house with a porch that needs painting and a kitchen that only ever cooks for one. My wife and I did not have children. When she left, the house got quiet, and I told myself I liked it that way, and for the most part I believed me. So when I say I knew Grace, I have to be honest about what that means. Grace Palmer was my little sister Katie's best friend from college. The two of them met freshman year and never really unmet. For 10 years, Grace had been at the edges of my life the way your sister's friends are, at the Thanksgiving table one year, in the background of somebody's wedding photos. I knew her face. I knew she laughed quietly, that she was the one who did the dishes without being asked, but I did not know her. Not the way you know someone whose weight you have felt on your own life. That is the part I keep coming back to now, telling this from the far side of everything, knowing what I know. Because when she stood on my porch that night and asked if she could stay, I believed her completely. I had no reason not to. It would be a long while before I learned she had driven right past 3 exits with motels lit up along the highway to get to my street. Before I understood that of all the doors in the world she could have knocked on, she had chosen mine, and that the choosing had started years before either of us was standing in that rain. But I did not know any of that yet. What I knew was that she was shaking, and it was almost midnight, and the temperature had dropped the way it does in October when the rain gets serious. So I did what you do. I stepped back and let her in. I got her a towel from the hall closet, and she pressed it to her face and stood dripping on my floor, apologizing for the water. I told her to stop apologizing. I put a pot of coffee on because it was the only thing I could think to do with my hands, and the kitchen filled up with that smell, and outside the rain kept hammering the tin roof of the shop next door, a sound I had heard 1,000 nights alone and never once shared. She held the mug with both hands like she was trying to get warm all the way through. I asked her what happened, and she gave me the shape of it and none of the middle. The company in Charlotte had cut her whole department. Her lease was up the same week. She had packed what fit in the car and started driving, and somewhere on the road it had gotten late, and here she was. She said it plainly, no drama, staring into the coffee, and every time I got near the real question, the why me of it, the why now, she slid past it so smoothly I almost did not notice she was doing it. I made up the couch with the spare quilt while she changed into dry clothes. I remember standing in the living room afterward with my hands smelling of wood glue and the linseed oil that never washes off, listening to the shower run. I fix broken things for a living. Old chairs people are sure are done for. Turns out I am slower to notice when a person is in the same shape. I told myself it was temporary, just until she landed something. Just till I land something, she said later, from the doorway, as if she had heard me thinking it. I'll be out of your way. I told her she wasn't in my way. I meant it more than I understood. She was not, it turned out, someone who could sit still in a house that needed things. By the third morning I came downstairs to find the coffee already made and Grace at my kitchen table with the shop's shoebox of receipts open in front of her, sorting them into little paper towers with a concentration I had not seen on anyone's face in a long time. I should explain about the shoebox. I am good with my hands and hopeless with numbers. For years, my bookkeeping had been a matter of throwing every invoice and receipt into a box and panicking once a spring when taxes came due. Grace had been an accountant. That was the job in Charlotte, the one that got cut, and she looked at my shoebox the way I look at a chair somebody's dog has chewed, like it was a problem she already knew how to love. "You can't run a business out of a shoebox, Sam," she said, not unkindly. "I've been running one out of a shoebox for 6 years, and it's been screaming for help the whole time." So she started keeping my books. She did not ask permission, and I did not think to withhold it. Within a week, she had a spreadsheet with columns I did not know I needed, and she could tell me things about my own shop I had never known. Which repairs actually made money, which regular customers paid late, how much the building itself had crept up in value, as the neighborhood filled in with coffee places and people who paid $4 for it. She knew my life in numbers better than I did, and she was quiet about it, and it never once felt like she was taking anything. It felt like someone had turned a light on in a room I had been sitting in the dark. In return, I taught her the shop. It started because she asked. She would drift out to the workshop in the evenings and stand near the bench watching me work. And one night she asked if she could try, and I put a block of scrap in her hands and showed her how to sand with the grain instead of against it, how to feel for the place where the wood stops fighting you. She was careful and she was patient, and she got it faster than most people I have hired. She learned the difference between a finish that hides a flaw and one that admits it and makes it beautiful anyway. And I remember thinking that not many people understand that about wood or about anything else. We fell into a rhythm without ever deciding to. I would open the shop, she would bring 2 coffees out around 10, and we would work through the afternoon with the big door rolled up and the light coming in gold across the sawdust. I got so used to the sound of her that the days I had a delivery and worked alone felt wrong, felt too much like they used to. Mornings, the smell of coffee became a thing that meant she was awake. In the evenings we cooked, badly at first, then better, and ate at the little table, with the shop noise gone quiet next door, and the 2 of us too tired to do anything but sit there being comfortable. I did not examine any of this. I just let it be good, and let good feel ordinary, which is the most dangerous thing you can let a thing become, because you stop seeing it. We took on a job together that month, a client's grandmother's roll-top desk that had sat in a flooded basement and warped almost past saving, and we spent 3 weeks on it, side by side, coaxing the old oak back into square a little at a time. When the woman came to pick it up, she ran her hand across the tambour and went quiet a long moment, and Grace stood back near the wall and watched her, arms folded, that small, private look on her face, and I watched Grace, and I thought that I had never enjoyed finishing a piece so much in my life. I told myself that was about the work. It was not about the work. There were evenings I would look up from the bench and find her already looking at me, and she would go back to her sanding a beat too fast, and I would go back to mine, and the shop would fill with the small, industrious sound of 2 people pretending. I did not have a word for what was happening in that room. I had 100 reasons it was nothing. She was my sister's friend. She was a guest. She had lost everything and was only leaning on the nearest steady thing. Every reason was true. Not one of them was the truth. Katie called from Denver in the middle of all this, the way she does, loud and happy and 3 time zones behind. I told her Grace was staying with me for a bit, and there was a small pause on the line, and then Katie said, "Good. That's good, Sam." And then, warmer, almost to herself, "Grace has always looked out for this family. Always." I did not know what to do with that, so I laughed it off and asked about the kids, and Katie let me. But the sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Always. As if there were a history there I had somehow been standing next to the whole time without ever reading the spine of it. The near thing happened on an ordinary Tuesday. We were moving a walnut slab off the sawhorses, one of us on each end, and it was heavier than it looked, and as we set it down, her hands slid up the wood at the same moment mine did, and our fingers overlapped, just for a second. Neither of us pulled away fast, and neither of us stayed. We both just stepped back and looked at the slab like it had done something, and I said something about needing to plane the edge, and she said something about the coffee getting cold, and we did not look at each other for about a minute. That was all. Nothing happened, but I lay awake that night longer than I wanted to admit, feeling the ghost of 4 fingers on the back of my hand and telling myself it meant nothing, and not sleeping. There was one more thing, and I did not understand it at the time. I had gone up to put a stack of clean towels in the spare room where she slept, and on the nightstand there was a small wooden box. Walnut, dovetailed at the corners, a simple carved leaf on the lid, the finish worn soft at the edges the way a thing gets when it has been handled for years. I picked it up before I thought about it. It fit my hand strangely well. Something moved at the back of my mind, some old familiar shape I could not bring forward, like a word, you know. Grace came in with an armful of laundry and stopped when she saw it in my hand. She did not grab for it. She just went very still. You keep your important stuff in that? I asked, turning it over, running my thumb along the seam of the lid. Someone told me to, once, she said. I waited for more, and there wasn't any. She set the laundry down and I set the box back on the nightstand exactly where it had been, and something about the way she watched me do it made me careful, though I could not have said why. I told myself it was just a box. I told myself she was a private person who had lost everything she owned except what fit in a car, and of course she was protective of the little she had left. That was true. As far as it went, it just did not go far enough. The whole answer was sitting right there in my hand, the grain under my thumb familiar as my own name, and I set it down and walked out and did not see it. I have thought about that a great deal since, how a person can hold the truth and feel its weight and still not know what they are holding, how you can be looking straight at the thing and call it something else, because the real name of it would change your whole life, and you are not ready yet for your life to change. Vanessa came back on a Saturday. I have to be careful telling this part, because for a long time I told it wrong, even to myself. So, let me be plain. My ex-wife did not come back because she missed me. She came back because word had gotten around. The shop had been written up in the paper that spring, a piece about the old furniture restorer keeping a dying craft alive, with a nice photograph of me looking uncomfortable next to a Federal-era secretary I had spent 4 months on. People saw it. And Vanessa, wherever she was, heard the other thing underneath it, that the neighborhood had turned, that the building I owned was worth real money now, that the man she had left because he was going nowhere had quietly become someone with something to take. I know now that the thing she had, the man with the money, had fallen through around then. I did not know it at the time. All I knew was that on a Saturday afternoon her car pulled up in front of the shop, and she came in on her heels across my sawdust floor, and the whole room changed. Her perfume hit first, sharp and expensive, wrong in a place that smells like linseed and cut wood. She smiled at me like no time had passed, and no doors had ever closed. "The place looks good, Sam," she said, looking at everything but me. "You look good. I always said you had it in you." She had never said that. Not once, in 5 years of marriage, had she told me I had anything in me. They rewrite the past out loud, right in front of you, daring you to correct them, and it works more often than it should because part of you wants it to be true. I stood there in my own shop, feeling the old familiar smallness her voice used to put in me, and I hated that it still fit. And then Grace came out of the back with 2 coffees in her hands, the way she did every afternoon, and stopped. I watched Vanessa's face do the arithmetic. She looked at Grace, and she looked at the 2 coffee mugs, and she looked at the shop that clearly had a woman living somewhere at the edges of it, and something behind her eyes clicked into place, and her smile changed. It got sharper. It got interested. "Grace," she said, drawing the name out. Grace Palmer. Of course. Grace set the coffees down on the bench, very evenly. Vanessa, Katie's little friend. Vanessa turned to me, delighted now, like she had found a present she had forgotten she was owed. Sam, do you even know? Has she told you? I said I didn't know what she was talking about. She's in love with you. Vanessa laughed, light and cruel. She has been in love with you for years. Since college, Sam, Katie told me herself, back when you and I were still together. Katie thought it was sweet, this whole devoted little crush, Grace, and the box he made her. She looked back at Grace, and her voice went silk. You still have it, don't you? That little box. The shop was very quiet. Somewhere behind me the compressor kicked on and shut off again. Think about it, Sam. Vanessa was warming to it now, pacing a slow line across my floor, heels clicking on the boards. She waits years. She never says a word. And then, the exact month your shop is in the paper and this building is worth what it's worth, she just happens to lose her job and her apartment in the same week, and just happens to show up on your doorstep in the rain with a suitcase. 8 years in a little box, Sam. That is not nowhere to go. That is a plan. She waited for you to fall. And then she waited for you to be worth something. And then she came and knocked. Here is what I want you to understand about that moment. Grace had been keeping my books for months. She knew, down to the dollar, exactly what the shop was worth and exactly what it wasn't. She knew the building's value was mostly on paper, that I had no real cash, that the money in that newspaper story was the kind that exists in an appraisal and nowhere else. If Grace had wanted money, she would have known before anyone alive that there was very little here to take, and she had never once mentioned it, never once turned a single number toward her own pocket. Vanessa was standing in my shop accusing Grace of scheming to seize something. Grace was the only person in the room who actually knew the true, small size of, and it was almost nothing, and the woman who kept my books had asked me for nothing but a corner of a couch. But I did not say that. I am ashamed of it now. I stood there and let Vanessa's voice get into me, because doubt is easy and it is loud, and Grace's kind of truth had always been quiet, and quiet is easy to miss when someone is shouting a story that puts you at the center of it. For a few long seconds I actually wondered. That is the part I have had to make peace with. I wondered. It is a humbling thing to admit how fast the loud story beat the quiet one inside me. Grace had shown me months of steadiness, of asking for nothing, of turning a light on in my dark rooms without ever once sending a bill. Vanessa had shown me a single afternoon of perfume and a rewritten past, and for a handful of seconds the afternoon won, because it came wrapped in certainty. And certainty is what a doubting man reaches for even when he can smell that it is poison. I have gone back to those seconds many times since. I do not let myself off for them, but I have learned something from them about the difference between the people who announce their love and the people who simply keep showing up. Vanessa saw me hesitate. She always could read a weakness. She walked over to the workbench, where the box sat beside Grace's stacked ledgers, and picked it up, turned it in her manicured hand like a piece of evidence, held it up to the window light. This it? This the famous box? She wrinkled her nose. He probably made a dozen of these. And Grace, who had not said a single word through all of it, who had stood there with her jaw set and her hands very still, finally moved. She crossed the room and took the box out of Vanessa's hand, gently, no snatch, just lifted it away the way you take something breakable from a child. She set it down on the bench, careful, both hands, exactly level, and stood there with her back straight and her breathing even. Ask her, Sam, Vanessa said, still smiling. Ask her when it started. Grace picked up her bag from beside the door. She got the strap over her shoulder. She did not look at Vanessa at all. She looked at me once, and whatever was in her face, she did not let it get any further than her eyes. I'll get my things, she said, and she went up the stairs, quiet as ever, to pack the little she had, and I stood in the middle of my own shop with my ex-wife's perfume hanging in the air where the smell of wood used to be, and let it happen. I do not know how long I stood there. Long enough for Vanessa to say a few more things I have mostly let myself forget. Something about coming to my senses, about her and me, about how glad she was that she had shown up when she did. Long enough for her to realize I was not listening. She left the way weather leaves, all at once, and the door swung shut behind her, and the shop smelled like her for another hour, and then like wood again. It had started raining while she talked. I only noticed when it got loud on the tin roof, that same sound from that first night, and something in it turned me around and moved me toward the stairs. Grace was in the spare room with the suitcase open on the bed, folding her few shirts into it with the same care she folded everything. The box was already in her leather bag. She did not stop when I came in. She said, without turning, that she was sorry. That she should have told me, that she never meant for me to find out like this, that Vanessa was not entirely wrong about the college part, and that was the worst of it. Then tell me the rest, I said. She stopped folding, and she told me. Standing there with a shirt in her hands, in her plain, quiet voice, she told me the whole of it, that yes, she had loved me since she was 22, that it started one night 8 years ago, when her car died in a storm 2 streets over and she had nowhere to go and Katie was out of town, and a man she barely knew came out in the rain and got her car running and would not let her wait outside, and made her coffee and did not make it strange, and before she left had pressed something into her hands and told her to keep her important things in it. She said she had loved me quietly for 8 years and had made a rule with herself and never once broken it. The rule was that she would never be the woman who arrived to collect. She would never let it be a plan. That was why she had said nothing at my wedding. That was why she had smiled and helped Katie with the flowers and gone home. And that was why, when everything fell apart in Charlotte and her body seemed to drive her north on its own, she had spent the whole last hour of that drive furious at herself, passing motel after motel, with their empty little signs lit up, telling herself to stop, telling herself she had no right, and had knocked on my door anyway and hated that she needed to. She said the worst part was not that she loved me. The worst part was that tonight, for the first time in 8 years, someone had finally said it out loud and made it sound like theft, and she could not think of a single way to prove it wasn't, because you cannot prove the inside of your own heart to anybody. All she could do was leave, so that at least no one could ever say she had stayed to take. So she's right, Grace said. Not about the money. There is no money, Sam. I keep your books. I would know before anyone. But about the rest, she's right. I did come here loving you. I used a true reason to hide a truer one. And I can't stand in your shop and let her make it sound ugly and pretend that isn't exactly what she said it was. She zipped the bag. She lifted the suitcase off the bed, and I finally understood what I had been holding all those weeks. Wait, I said. She waited, at the top of the stairs, in the gray light, the rain coming down behind the window. I reached into her bag, and she let me, and I took out the box. I turned it over in my hands, and this time the old familiar shape came all the way forward, the way a word finally arrives after you have stopped chasing it. The dovetails I had cut when I was 26 and just learning to cut them clean. The little leaf I had carved on the lid because I could not think of anything else to put there. I had made it in a week when I could not sleep, and I had given it to a soaked, embarrassed girl standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m. because she looked like she needed to be handed something, and I had forgotten I ever did it. 8 years, and I had carried the not knowing while she carried the box. I made this, I said. The wood had gone warm in my hands. I made this box. I gave it to a girl who was stuck in the rain 8 years ago, and I forgot I ever did it. I looked up at her. You didn't. She did not say anything. Her hand tightened on the suitcase handle and then, slowly, let go. She came back because I'm finally worth something, I said. You came when I was worth nothing. You've spent 8 years making sure it never once looked like what it was. And the only thing you are guilty of is loving me so carefully I couldn't see it. I set the box down on the little table by the stairs, right side up, like it belonged there. "Don't get your things, stay." My voice did something I did not plan for it to do. This time I'm asking. Outside, the rain kept on, the same as the first night, the same as it always would. She set the suitcase down on the top step. That was all. She just set it down, and in the whole quiet house, that small sound was the loudest thing I had ever heard. We did not fall into each other that night the way they do in the movies. It was better than that, and slower. She stayed. We carried her few things back out of the suitcase, and did not talk much about what it meant, and for a while we just kept doing the life we had already been doing. The coffee, the books, the shop, except that now, when our hands met over a walnut slab, neither of us stepped back. It took time to say the words out loud, and more time to believe them, and I think that suited us both. We had each spent years being careful. We got to spend a few being sure. There was a first real dinner, awkward and grinning, at the diner 2 blocks over, both of us acting like we did not already know every ordinary thing about each other. There was a first morning I woke before her and lay still, just listening to the house hold 2 people again. Small things. The kind of thing that does not photograph and does not tell and is somehow the entire point of a life. Spring came. Then the spring after that. I am telling this from more than a year down the road now, and the strange thing about happiness is how little of it makes a good story. There is not much to say about the mornings, except that there were a great many of them, and the smell of toast in a kitchen that used to only cook for one, and Grace at the table with her spreadsheets and me across from her with my coffee, arguing gently about whether we could afford a second bench and a proper dust collector for the shop. We could, as it turned out. The shop steadied. Not into anything grand. Grace's books made sure I never fooled myself about that, but into something real, something that paid for a life and left a little over. She had been right about the building all along. The value was on paper and had stayed on paper, and we were both fine with that. We hired a kid part-time, a serious young man who sands the way I taught her to sand. It is a strange gift, being loved by someone who knows the exact true size of everything you have, to the dollar, and stayed anyway, and never once made you feel counted. Vanessa did not come back a third time. I heard, the way you hear things, that once she understood there was no fortune here to fold herself back into, that the newspaper shop and the valuable building added up, in cash, to a decent middle-class life and no more. She lost interest entirely and moved on to whatever came next for her. That was the whole of her, in the end. She had come back for a number, and when the number turned out to be ordinary, so did her love, and she took it somewhere else. I do not think about her much anymore. When I do, it is without heat. If anything, I am grateful. She showed me, by standing right next to Grace for one afternoon, exactly what I had almost been too slow to keep. Katie flew in from Denver that first summer, and when she walked into the house and saw Grace at the stove and saw the way I looked at Grace at the stove, she put her hand over her mouth and made a sound she will deny to her grave. Finally, was all she could get out, over and over, hugging us both so hard I could not breathe. Finally. Later, on the porch with the crickets going, she told me she had known since we were kids that Grace was the best person she had ever met, and that she had spent years biting her tongue while I married the wrong one, and that if I ever hurt her she would fly back and end me. I told her I believed her. I did. The seasons did the work that words could not. There was a winter we spent most nights by the wood stove, her feet in my lap, both of us reading, the shop gone quiet next door under the snow. There was a summer the tomatoes she planted along the back fence came in all at once, and we ate them standing at the counter over the sink because we could not wait to sit down. There is no drama in any of it, which is exactly what I had been missing all those years, without ever knowing the name of the thing. I had spent so long being the man who fixes what other people gave up on that I had half forgotten a life could just be steady and kept and not need saving at all. The box lives on a shelf in the living room now, where the afternoon light comes across it. For 8 years, it had been hidden in a bag, carried from apartment to apartment, opened only in private. Now the lid stays up. Grace keeps small things in it. A spare key, a pressed flower off the dogwood out front, a folded receipt from the first coffee she ever bought me back before either of us would say what we were. I catch her, sometimes, running her thumb along the seam of the lid the way I did the night I held it, and did not understand it. The grain has gone burnished under all that handling, soft and dark and shining, the way a thing gets when someone has loved it a long time. I understand it now. There was a night last fall, almost exactly a year after the first one, when it came down hard again, that same October rain drumming on the shop's tin roof next door. We were on the couch, and out of the dark there came a sound at the door, the house settling. A branch. I never did figure out what, but it knocked. Twice, the way a person knocks. We both froze. We both looked at the door, and then we looked at each other, and Grace started to laugh, quietly. The way she does everything. And I started to laugh too, because we had both had the exact same thought in the exact same instant, that once a knock at the door on a night like this had been the whole hinge of 2 lives, and that this time, whoever it was out there in the rain, it did not matter. There was no one left standing on the wrong side of the door. Everyone who belonged in this house was already inside it, dry and home. "You finally put it where I can see it," she said later, nodding at the box on the shelf. The way she still brought it up sometimes, gently, like she could hardly believe it was allowed to sit out in the open. "It was always yours," I told her. "I just took the long way to admit it. I think about doors a lot now. For 8 years, the loud one and the quiet one were both out there somewhere in my life, and I could not tell them apart because I was measuring the wrong things. Vanessa came back the moment I was worth something, all perfume and heels, and a story that put her at the center of my success. Grace came in the rain when I was worth nothing, and asked for a corner of my couch, and spent years making sure her love never once looked like a hand held out for something. One of them wanted what I had. The other one had wanted me the whole time, back when there was nothing to want. The night I finally understood was the night I held that box and felt the grain go familiar under my thumb. 8 years before, I had given a stranger shelter from the rain and thought nothing of it. I never knew that she carried a piece of my house away with her that night, and kept it, and brought it back, that some part of home had been walking around the world in a leather bag the whole time, waiting for me to recognize it. I used to think I was the one who let her in. Turns out she had been carrying a piece of my house for 8 years, waiting for me to notice it was hers. So let me ask you 2 things before you go. Have you ever had someone standing right in front of you for years, and only really seen them when they had nowhere left to hide? And if the loud one and the quiet one both came back on the same rainy night, which door would you open? If this story got to you, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell me down in the comments, which door would you open